few seconds for the tape to kick in. Oh, I'm really pleased to be able to welcome you here for this talk tonight, Vikki. I should start by introducing myself. I'm Warren Matofsky, clinical psychologist, group psychotherapist, and I work on the Surrey Psych D program. I'm really chuffed to be able to welcome Vikki. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Oh, thanks so much for contacting me, Warren. I'm really happy to be here. I'm Vikki Reynolds. I live on the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, who are the indigenous people of these territories of what gets called Vancouver and what gets called Canada. I'm a white settler to these nations, and this land was never ceded or surrendered. And there's like rich histories of resistance, 500 years of indigenous resistance to colonization and genocide here. So as a white settler, I always need to start and where I stand on that territory and what I'm accountable for that as a white settler in terms of the privileges of and how I benefit from those catastrophes, of white supremacy, colonization, and genocide. So that's where I start. I have a PhD in psychology too, Warren. And I've worked as, I've been a professor with people in master's and PhD programs. I situate myself really as a social justice activist, though, and community organizer. That's more what really defines the work that I do. And I think my life work has been trying to bring the teachings from social movement work and justice work into the stuff that gets called therapy or social work as a clinical supervisor. Like clinical supervisor is all language I don't like, or therapeutic supervisor, whatever it is. So I think a lot of what I'm trying to do is bridge the ethical stance and practices we have in solidarity movements into the stuff that gets called therapy or community work or social work. And I call my work a supervision of solidarity. That's really, what I kind of wrote my PhD on. That's where I stand in this.
Thanks, Vikki. And I suppose it's connected with, how you've positioned yourself there. Before we get into our talk, I'm aware in our discussion how we're going to talk about anti-racism as to white folk, me as a Ashkenazi, Jewish, Russian, Polish kind of white guy, but also a quarter Scouse, and you with your particular heritage. How, given that, can we reduce the chance that we don't, reproduce sort of white supremacist talk like, I don't know, the evil twins of saviorism or fragility or that kind of stuff? What will support us in this conversation to keep our focus?
Well, I think the first thing I think about a lot is about resisting perfectionism as white supremacy and patriarchy. This idea you have to have it right before you can say anything. So I think there's no chance we won't be replicating white supremacy because we're white, and no matter what other intersections we hold, that's true. So I think it's very unlikely that we'll have a pure and perfect conversation. But I think what I think about it is just I think about white supremacy as the most comforting human experience there is. It hangs with wealth because it is wealth in different ways. And I think about if I don't attend to the privilege of white supremacy, I'm going to enact it. So I think if we both stay a bit uncomfortable, and discerning feeling unsafe from feeling uncomfortable, like we're both a little bit on edge and have intentions to not replicate, I think that's what we can do, and hold on and standing on the shoulders of every non-white person and person of color who's taught me anything about trying to be useful to folks, like just bringing people in the room with all of those folks to both hold us accountable, but also hold us in a very strained solidarity, I think.
Yeah, thank you. We can support each other with some self-compassion there. I mean, one of the many reasons I kind of invited you to join this discussion was a point you made in kind of one of your talks. And it was a great point because it was sort of really insightful and obvious at the same time, which I really value. And it's you framed anti-racist and anti-discriminatory practice as kind of unambitious, if all it really offers is that I'm not going to oppress you as a supervisee. And I wondered if you could say a bit more about that and what a social justice or liberatory supervision, how it might differ.
Thanks for that. Yeah, often people will use the language of an anti-oppressive practice. And I'm like, the bar is too damn low. Like, okay, we're not going to oppress people. Okay, I didn't come here to not oppress people. I actually want to deliver justice to people or participate alongside them as we try to move into more liberatory spaces. So for me, I talk about my work as justice doing. And I don't make claims to being anti-racist or anti-colonial, but I have intentions to be decolonizing, and to do justice with people in the intersections of power. Um, and so, yeah, for me, I just think, yeah, sometimes when we're positioning ourselves against something, it doesn't leave a lot of room for what we're actually required to bring to folks or co-create alongside people. So that's what I think about it. When I think about like liberatory practice in supervision, again, I think it's about power. It's about the intersections of power and never abdicating our power as supervisors or pretending we don't. When people say, I just mutualize it, well, they don't say that they mutualize it. They say, I just tell everybody, we're all equal here. We're not, and we ought not to be. There's something about, it's not about hierarchically being better. There's about, like, if I think of group supervision, I'm not on with people saying, oh, me and colleagues, we meet together, we have a glass of wine or something, and we talk about our work. We do peer supervision. That is not peer supervision. Someone has to take responsibility for creating an ethical frame that's going to be held accountable to clients and to the ethics that we hold. That's how you slip into, that's how you can slip into having conversations where it feels uncomfortable to name that someone's done something white supremacist or is furthering ideas of psychology, which is so white supremacist and Eurocentric in its origins. There has to be someone who's specifically their task as the clinical supervisor is to hold an ethical frame and the structure to accountability and have the moral courage to be able to name that and disrupt what's going for normal. So often, I don't know about you, Warren, but I did all kinds of supervision trainings, everything I could get my hands on. And they were mostly about helping your supervisees feel comfortable with you and feeling okay. And I was like, shit, that's not what I do. I think discomfort is absolutely, we know this. I'm thinking of Cashmere's work, a Canadian social worker who talked about how discomfort is actually required in supervision for people to be able to address power, things like racism. Like it's absolutely required to be discomforted in it. Right. And so I'm not trying to have people anxious, but I want us all or walking on eggs, but I want us to have more than our good intentions. I want us also to be, really having an embodied experience where I'm listening for that stuff I call spiritual pain. When you transgress and you don't even have language for it, but somewhere your body, which is your best resource, gives you information like something's not on here. Disrupt that. Get curious about the body and just say, like, what has there been a disruption here? What are we doing that's not fitting? Yeah.
Thank you. No, because we talk, one of the things that comes up in some of our trainings about the danger of coziness, and I think you've written about the politics of kind of politeness and
Yeah.
how you can create a space that's accountable and sort of looks at those power dynamics. And I guess connected with that, as you know, our discussion is quite practically focused about, how our regional supervisors can support supervisees. And it's really about just some tips, suggestions about how supervisors can seek to create a space that is accountable, that's potentially anti-racist and anti-discriminatory.
Well, I think a liberatory practice requires that we create relationships of respect and dignity with the people we're supervising and that we hold collective ethics. And I think too often, I mean, this is why I started to write about supervision. I just didn't see what I was looking for in all of the trainings, Warren. Everything was pretty much tied to theoretical ideas and practice. And then there was this, does your therapeutic practice, are you fully being a narrative therapist? Are you doing social constructionism? Like, is this motivational interviewing? And it's like, you can be as racist with a narrative question as with a psychodynamic question. I mean, there's no theoretical or practice ideas that are going to keep us ethical. So for me, the heart of clinical supervision is ethics. And it's not a personal thing, it's collective ethics. So for me, when I supervise groups of folks, and I actually, I don't like the word supervision for all those carceral reasons. I'm an abolitionist. And so I think about my groups as solidarity groups, and that my job is to be the person that creates a frame. I am leading those groups. But when I think about what I'm doing in those groups, I have people doing all kinds of different work in my supervision groups. People who are working with prisoners in solitary confinement, who are kind of lawyers in a way. I have people that are working with homeless folks and really kind of resisting the carceral logics there. I have people who are doing like what would get called alternative practice, seeing people or people who are in drug and alcohol programs, like a real myriad of stuff. For me, there's a great I find that super useful, and everybody's from extremely different locations. If we look at intersectionality, different, not, but for me, diversity is not about having people who look different than you only. Like that's so tokenist. I'm thinking about people who actually think different, have different life experiences and lived experiences, and would offer different ways to be of use to clients, because we're always trying to have it be that we don't want supervision to be staff centered. We want it to be client centered. So within this like real diverse, diversity of folks, we agree on collective ethics. And if our ethics are okay, it's all right that we have different practices and different theoretical ideas, as long as they're all because ethical principles are never in conflict, right? So we can, and that really avoids groupthink and keeps up all these kind of other ideas. So I'll just leave it there. I could go, as all of us, I go on endlessly about my ideas about this stuff.
Oh, no, definitely. And I have a particular interest in group supervision, and I would happily go there. But I'm just conscious for a lot of our supervisors, they're working in individual supervision. They're working with supervisees for maybe 6 months, kind of on placement. And just to ask, from your experience, what might be the kinds of conversations, or if I use the T word, technique, but just ways of exploring to set up that ethical space that have worked well for you? And obviously it's to do with the kind of person you are, but anything from that might be resourceful to our supervisors.
Well, I guess the first thing that I would say is be out about your politics, be out about your ethical stands. I'm against genocide in this country. I'm against genocide in Palestine. I'm against genocide in Sudan. I worked against genocide in Tibet and still do. I'm an abolitionist. I don't believe in policing or prisons or putting any people in cages. I think there's I'm a person who's a working class person, and I believe in solidarity, and I believe in taxes and social reform. I think that our supervisees need to know some of our positions. I let folks know, Warren, that I'm straight and cisgendered because I spend a lot of supervision time in the queer community, in the trans non-binary community, and people need to know I am not from there. When I supervise workers who are working in addictions, especially if they have histories of substance use, I let them know I have never had addiction as an issue in my life. And the reason I do that is because I've got sleeve tattoos, I'm very working class, and I'm an activist. And I think supervisees are so desperate to get a supervisor who gets them, who's part of their experience, that they want to see more connection in our identities than are actually there. So I make public what is where my locations are, and then I make public what my ethics are. And not as like a just, you want to be careful how you do this, but I think it's absolutely essential to do that so that supervisees don't, especially supervisees of color or who's subjected to white supremacy and supervision, so they don't have to they don't have to do all of the hard work of trying to look through us to see what we're actually about. So all of that neutrality and objectivity supervision stuff, all in my master's and some of my PhD, I was told, we think you're smart, we think you're really going to go somewhere, but you got to drop all your politics. And the reality, of course, has been, as a clinical supervisor, it's been my ethics that have drawn people to me and made me useful. The fact that I resist neutrality and objectivity. And you don't want to center yourself in clinical supervision, but I think it's our task as the supervisor to create a context where people know where they're standing, and there can be really important differences and divisions between us. We don't have to be in unity. Solidarity is never about unity, but there has to be some collective ethics there. And then I come with, what Paul Ricoeur would talk about in terms of a hermeneutics of suspicion. I come with like a hopeful skepticism. I am hopeful that people are enacting, that my supervisees are enacting like their ethical practice, like an anti-racist practice, if you want to talk about that one domain of power. But I'm also skeptical that it's not happening. So I'm not looking, okay.
So I just want to rewind, because you used a great phrase that I don't know if all our listeners would have called, something called the hermeneutics of suspicion. I wonder, could you just break that down a little bit? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, hermeneutics is the study of interpretation. And Paul Ricoeur and Cavale wrote a lot about this kind of suspicion. And when I go, I use these, like that's a useful construct for me, because when I go into clinical supervision with a person, I am hopeful that they are enacting their ethics, but I am skeptical that they are not. And I hold those two things in attention because I'm trying to be useful to people. And in particular, I want my clinical supervision to always be client-centered. So while we can talk about racism and white supremacy and how it's experienced in supervision, that lands on clients, right? And so, yeah, for me, I have a hopeful skepticism. I am looking for sites of resistance against white supremacy and the replication of those tropes, but I'm also really open that I might see some vestiges of where it's present. And I want to have the moral courage to be able to interrupt smoothing things over and name that and get curious about that and move in solidarity in ways, especially because I'm a white supervisor that says I am white. And if I'm supervising a white person, I'm like, I am also white. And I've also done these things and I meet them in solidarity, not in like supervision, but more alongside, like as an ally. Yeah, more as an ally. But when it's with, when I'm seeing, people of color, indigenous people who would identify as people of color, I also don't want to replicate a politics that says, I'm white, you're a person of color, so everything you're doing is okay. And I think sometimes supervisors get caught in a loop that as long as I don't do white supremacy with the therapist, things are good for the clients. And that's not true because psychology is white supremacist, right? If we just take it to another category for a moment, I think about Bell Hooks, Black feminist from the States, who talks about feminism, that feminism is not something women do. It's not your gender that makes what you're doing feminist. If you're doing domination and control, no matter you're a woman, a man, or a non-binary person or a trans person, you are doing patriarchy. And so I think it's very possible for people of color to also be replicating white supremacist ideas because the tropes we're in, the structures we're in, are white supremacist to the core and structure. And so I think that takes a lot of respect and dignity, being a white supervisor, trying to disrupt how white supremacy is working within and being participated with by therapists who are people of color, right?
Sure. I mean, sorry, one of the points you made there about levels of support, it's come up in some of our research and our dialogue here on anti-racist supervision, that there's a danger of white supervisors either under-supporting or over-supporting black supervisees because of kind of some of the reasons you've said. And I just wondered, I was just thinking about what are some of the traps you can fall into, maybe what are some of the things supervisors can avoid, or what are some things for them to keep an eye on as they're, trying to navigate and negotiate the kind of ethical frame that you're presenting?
Well, I think the most important thing is supervisors have to get clinical supervision from people of color, like straight up. Most people, I think that's what's missing. And I think about enmeshment and disconnection, like kind of zone of fabulousness. Like you have to worry that you're getting disconnected or you're getting enmeshed with someone. I think the traps really are righteousness, I think is a huge trap. So, as someone who identifies as an activist with an ethic of justice, saying, come on, I think it's really gutsy to say my work is about justice doing. I mean, that's a hell of a claim. I'm not saying my work is that. I'm saying that's my stance. I try to be really clear about that. But one of the things I'm most worried about is righteousness and how that can slip in. And I've had so many therapists of color and Black therapists and Indigenous therapists come to me and say, the supervision they're getting at work, which they don't have choices about, the individual, they've got a white supervisor who's trying to teach them about, slavery and Black oppression, who's trying to teach them about how much they understand about colonization and genocide and invasion and occupation and assimilation. You know what I mean? And it's about this white supervisor either being righteous or losing the plot or trying to win over the person by saying, I'm one of the good guys. And I think what we have to hold on to is kind of where you started with us, Warren. We are white and we're going to replicate this stuff. I work really hard to stay implicated. I think that is the key for me. I work to stay implicated in the catastrophes of white supremacy, and the ways that it elevates and benefits me and the way that it causes harm, that I benefit from that every day, no matter what my politics or actions are from, right? You know, children of mine, if they're missing, police are going to look for them. They're going to get less severely treated by cops, stuff like all of it, all of it. So I think that how do we resist righteousness and trying it? I think sometimes when supervisors are, because I supervise a lot of supervisors, right? I think when supervisors are trying to engender structuring safety across the intersection of race, especially when they're white supervisors and the person's a person of color, one of the things they want to do is just show that they're one of the good guys. And I think that is something that I know that people of color who are supervisors have let me know. That's a flag for many people to know this is not a trustworthy white person. This is someone who continually tells us they're not part of the problem, which means they're disconnected from that, I think, ethical response of clinical supervisors to stay implicated if we are white in our inner structures of power. And I just want to say here something from Angela Davis, you know, Black Panther and abolitionist Angela Davis, who said, when we look at intersectionality, it is not just the intersections of our identities, it's the intersections of struggle. And that's what I try to focus on as well. That makes it less about simplistic understandings of race and white supremacy and more around what's the intersections of our struggle, in particular in relationship to the client's struggles.
Thank you. Sorry, my computer just tried to update, but I've turned it off. Listen, Vikki, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I just wondered if anybody watching this wants to track down your work online, where can they find more Vikki Reynolds?
Well, I do a lot of workshops online, and I just created a series with times for the UK because everybody in the UK says they can never see me. So I'm doing 3-hour like supervision group things on different topics this year. You can find all this at my website, which is vikkireynolds.ca. But I spell my name kind of weird, Vikki. If you look up Vikki Reynolds Canada, you'll find me, and all that kind of work is listed there.
Thank you, Vikki.
Yeah,
thanks for your solidarity, and yeah, it's been lovely talking with you.
Really appreciate it. Thanks, Warren. Bye now.